At the initiative of the Department of State, the Biden administration is currently actively debating whether to allow Ukrainians to strike missile launchers and artillery systems located directly near the border on the Russian side.
And this comes amidst a worsening situation in the Kharkiv region as Ukrainian forces struggle to hold their ground amidst Russian attacks. Now, to discuss the latest, we are joined by Stephen Nix, International Republican Institute. Hello, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
So we're hearing that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is urging President Joe Biden to lift the restrictions. How do you think this will go? I mean, we know that Joe Biden is a very cautious politician. What do you think Joe Biden is going to do right before the elections, we have to mention?
Well, let me provide some context to this situation. First of all, as you know, our Congress recently adopted a $61 billion supplemental to assist Ukraine, $45 billion of which is military equipment. Our Congress did not assign any restrictions on Ukraine as to the use of these weapons. If you look at this statute, it merely declares that it's designed to help Ukraine defend its country. And logic prevails here. In defending their own country, Ukraine needs long-range weapons to stave off the Russian assault on Kharkiv. Russian forces are massing on the Russian side of the border, just kilometers from Ukraine. They feel safe because they know that Ukraine is restricted from using U.S. weapons to attack them. What Ukraine needs to do is attack en masse and destroy these units while they're still on the Russian side of the border. That's what this argument is all about.
But we've heard some sort of mixed signals. I forget the exact time frame, but I think it was about a month ago at Lloyd Austin, I think in Congress at a special hearing, very much cautioned against this, saying that particularly if it goes to striking energy facilities, that he was against that sort of thing. So is this now what you're saying? Actually, there's a different sort of argument to be made here that it is okay to use these launchers because some of them were limited by ammunition. And now you're saying that potentially this is a green light to go ahead and do this anyway.
Our sense is that the sands are shifting on this issue. Secretary of State Blinken testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee and basically was very vague in terms of describing whether or not Ukraine would have the right to use the weapons to strike within Russia proper. So that was the statement yesterday. Today, we understand talks are continuing. Our sense is that the White House is going to proceed to allow Ukraine to move forward. At least that's the hope. That's the sense we are getting based on the reports that we're receiving here in Washington.
Well, then if they get a go-ahead from an American official, if they will actually launch these weapons, how do you think this will change the situation in Ukraine right now?
Well, it will radically change the battlefield situation in Kharkiv, which is the most essential subject right now. These long-range strikes will enable Ukraine to relieve the pressure on Kharkiv and stave off the Russian offensive there. But it will also allow Ukraine to strike deeper into Russia to target their oil refineries, manufacturing, arms, drone factories. Again, this is all part of Ukraine's defense. They have the right to defend their country, and if that means striking into Russia proper, then they should be allowed to do so. That's the argument. And again, you saw members of Congress like Speaker Johnson speaking out very, very strongly in support of the administration doing this. Again, reminding everyone, Congress placed no limitations whatsoever on Ukraine's use of this weapon. So the White House will have to decide. From what we're hearing, we assess that they will do the right thing and allow Ukraine to strike within Russia with U.S.-supplied ATACMS, which was pointed out earlier in the broadcast, which is exactly what Ukraine needs to do to thwart this offensive on Kharkiv. But it will also affect other battlefield areas. Take Crimea, for example. Long-range ATACMS to use to strike Sevastopol, the Black Sea Fleet, other Russian infrastructure. So this will affect the entire southern and eastern fronts on the battlefield. So this is a major decision. We think and hope that the administration will make the right decision.
Now, it's a major decision indeed, Stephen. I think it will also, elicit a major counter-reaction by the Kremlin by Russian forces. Obviously, I think in our news service we just heard there a speaker of the Russian Defense Ministry saying very much that certain targets, then I think it was UK targets, they become legitimate not just in Ukraine but potentially anywhere beyond that. I mean, at this point it's rhetoric, but it's still a warning sign. We also have these Russian tactical nuclear weapons drills that are, I think, ongoing at this moment in time. I mean, without fear-mongering here too much, how likely is it that potentially that becomes more of a reality, that Putin would employ something like this if then the Ukrainians are starting to strike at Russian targets within Russia with NATO weaponry?
In response, I would make the following argument. At every stage of this conflict, whenever the West unveiled a new weapon system for Ukraine, Russia said that there would be consequences. Whether that was javelins, whether that was ATACMS, whether that was Abrams tanks, Russia always said there were consequences. There would be consequences. We haven't seen any consequences. Our assessment is there will not be similar consequences in this instance either. This fear of provoking Russia further, we feel, is unfounded. The United States has to allow Ukraine to strike Russia where it hurts, where it needs to, in order to defend its country, regardless of these continued threats by the Russian Federation.
So you truly don't believe that Putin is not going to react in any way? I mean, we know that Russia likes to escalate and likes to provoke, even if the situation doesn't exist. They will spin it that way that they can actually act on it, and that's very dangerous. So what do you think will happen? How do you think Russia will react?
Again, I think that these are empty threats. We've seen threats before. My viewpoint is the Ukraine has to press forward. The United States has to support it. Europe has to support it in this instance. And again, the last thing that the Kremlin wants is a confrontation with NATO. To follow through on these threats would mean that Russia is engaged in a conflict of NATO. We all know what the outcome of that conflict will be. It will be over in a matter of weeks, and Russia will be on the losing end.
But at the same time, Stephen, let me ask you there, because I think Putin is a very calculating man. I think he's very much set on pride. We've seen that now with another very grand fake election, if we can call it an election even. He's very much about legacy. He's very much about projecting himself in a strong position. Are we not, and I'm not countering that the Ukrainians don't require everything they need. They should defend their country. But at what point are we, perhaps, you said there were no counter reactions, there was nothing, there were empty threats. But how much of that is policy? And at some point then, if cornered, Putin would potentially react. Just briefly at the end.
Sure. I just think that we have to take these threats seriously. We have to note them. But again, we cannot be captured by Russian fear-mongering, Russian threats. We have to protect Ukraine. We have to allow Ukraine to defend its sovereignty. That's what we have decided to do. You in Europe and we here in the United States, we have dedicated this mission to protecting Ukraine, allowing Ukraine to defend its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and enabling them to strike Russia allows them to do this, regardless of whatever threats we might receive from the Kremlin. I think that's the right course. That's the course we should pursue.
All right.
Well, we'll see what happens. We'll see how, what President Zelensky is going to do. Stephen Nix, International Republican Institute, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.